All right, welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shauna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, we are now, goodness, midway into November.
Hmm.
There is no slowdown of topics to talk about. But I will say, Lisa, is that I've been isn't it interesting when you really have to strain to look for the silver lining in the topics? Every single, I mean, they're there, but you gotta look hard. It's like the clearance rack. Like you gotta look hard for
Hmm.
your size. You know what I'm saying? And so it's just been interesting to try to find the silver linings, but I think I can come up with at least one or two today. But how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. You're better at that than I am. I'm a bit of a Debbie Downer. And sometimes you're always like, what is the solution, Lisa? And I'm like, there isn't a solution. It's all awful.
Oh, I'm that no, I'm with you with the awful, but I'm also like, okay, what's in our realm of control? What can we do about it? Yes, it sucks. However, there's got to be at least one thing that we can do about it. So here we are. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you've trained me because I now will think twice about sending you a ranty email without offering some kind of solution because I know that I'm going to get back an email being like, that's nice. And how do you propose that we address this?
that is true. That is true. I will ask because I'm like, okay, what and again, it's there are many times where I don't have a solution to anything, but it's like, okay, let's be the how can I say? The issue sucks with a comma at the end of it, not a period at the end of it.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah,
it
yeah.
sucks. Therefore, let's do this about it. Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's where I try to live. I don't want to live in a place where it's like, yeah, I acknowledge it and
Right.
silence, silence. So
Well, I think it actually unintentionally this ties into the word of the week, right? So why don't you go ahead
for
and share
sure.
and share what we have or the phrase of the week, I guess this time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's get into word of the week. Word of the week is an interesting one that I literally just found out about today before we recorded. And it's a word called surplus powerlessness. Powerlessness. It's like Mississippi, it's got a lot of S's in it. Surplus
Hmm.
powerlessness. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing it well enough for you all to see the distinction here. But surplus powerlessness is a actually an entire book, not just a word, but it's an entire book that was written by Michael Lerner. And the word is the internalized belief that we are more powerless than we actually are. And he makes us think that it's a psychological condition that starts to limit our capacity for personal and collective
Hmm.
transformation, almost like it kind of reminds me of mindset, Lisa. Like, are you in a growth
Okay.
mindset or not in a growth mindset? That type of thing. And so his book, it's an older book. It was written in 1991, and it's called Surplus Powerlessness: The Psychodynamics of Everyday Life.
Mm.
And in that book, he argues that many people unconsciously adopt a self defeating mindset, and it's shaped by societal structures and past trauma, cultural narratives. I'm in this particular module that's talking about storytelling and what story
Hmm.
are we telling ourselves, whether it's individually or collectively. And so, with that, Michael is trying to get us to think about our thinking, our mindset, and how that convinces us individually or collectively sometimes that we don't have any agency to change our circumstances, even when we do have agency to
Mm.
change our circumstances.
Hmm.
And so, Lisa, this kind of reminds me of many times that I've heard, whether you're from an impoverished environment, any inner city environment. I grew up in a rural area, and people used to say this phrase all the time of being a quote unquote product of their environment. And I've always thought to myself, I'm like, well, you can have great products of your environment and negative products of your environment.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
but it's always used in, or not always, but often used in this context of if I'm a product of my environment, that means that maybe I am not a benefit to society and it's not my fault because that's the context I come from, rather than saying, no, actually, I'm going to do a 180 on my previous experience and I'm going to be a product of my environment in a very different way. And so, Lisa, I thought it was a really cool concept and an important concept, especially during a time, Lisa, where many people here in the US do feel hopelessness. They feel
Yeah,
like there's
yeah.
not a reason to be hopeful. Of course, going into a midterm election situation, it's time to think about our thinking in regard to where we identify power, and what we can do with it, rather than kind of this binary of either you have power or you don't. We got it. We just got to figure out where it is, how much we have of it,
Hmm.
what type we have, and then move accordingly. But Lisa, I know this has got to be new to you as well. When it comes to this book, this is an older book, so I would imagine a lot of people might not have even heard of it either. But how does that land on you, given that it's new language?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I'm thinking about how is it different or aligned with internalized oppression, right?
Ooh,
Where,
yeah, 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 yeah.
you take on those detrimental messages that exist in society and start to believe them about yourself, and then in some cases you kind of repeat them outward to other people who are also experiencing marginalization. And so
Hmm.
um that internal piece is what's really interesting to me because right now, and you and I have talked about this a lot, that the
Hmm.
degree to which things are changing and illegal acts and grifting and corruption and
Yes,
violence, like the speed and volume that we are experiencing in 11 months, has
yes.
left people feeling off kilter, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that, as we've talked about, and obviously has been reported in more effective news outlets, is that it's purposeful. So that
Yeah.
surplus powerlessness is being generated. The surplus piece of it is being generated purposefully,
Mm. Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So I think it speaks very much now to our moment, as you said. Um,
Yeah.
and then in general, it's really interesting because I'm just thinking about some of the commentary around Snap that happened earlier at the beginning of the month,
Mhm.
when a lot of particularly Republican senators were talking about how Snap needs to be reformed and how,
Yeah,
people are using it to get nails done and get their hair done. And then one senator specifically mentioned to get their weaves, right? So he was purposefully coding it.
that's right. That's right. That's
I
right.
think Nicole Hannah Jones had made that reference. Um, and
Hmm.
so then this, like, if you're on Snap and you're not a white person, you are taking advantage of the system. Um, so
Hmm.
it's like it's not exactly the same, but it's just making me think about the fact that there is this external message around you are just keeping yourself in this place because you're just not trying hard enough, right?
Hmm.
So you had mentioned right before we went on whether or not this is the same as or different from learned helplessness.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps it's different
Mm.
because I think maybe what I just articulated
Hmm. Hmm.
are
Yeah.
uneducated and lacking in compassion people saying that this is a learned helplessness, right? Like you're taking advantage of the system. Whereas this surplus powerlessness is more around how do we keep you quiet?
Yes, 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 yes. Yes, muting people and their narrative. Um, because it kind of goes back to what I shared, I believe, on a previous podcast around, some of these montages of folks that are on Snap and they are on Wick. And this was prior to our budget issues here and not having a budget allocation. Prior to that, they were already working full-time jobs plus more.
Right,
They
right.
were already only eating one meal as the adult of the household so that the rest of the children could eat. They were already sacrificing things, especially if they have an infant that's on formula, which is ridiculously expensive. Um, and having, can I say trope? A trope of who is quote unquote the welfare
Yep,
queen
yep,
or
yep.
whomever, um, and you actively using those tropes when those tropes make it seem as if there's no power to reframe that narrative. And that montage, if you were watching, completely obliterated that
Hmm.
narrative because it just simply was not true. And then, of course, Lisa, you know we love data. That coded language around weaves and braids and everything else we know was coded towards a certain demographic, which actually is not the top recipient of SNAP or WIC.
Well, and you can't even use, I mean, it's food benefit. Like it doesn't even make sense. It
Exactly.
just tells me that you don't know the heck you're talking about, right? Like you don't even have you ever gone to a grocery store? Right? This is an aside, but these folks saying I think it's
Right.
like $4,200 a year or something, which is like $120 a week. It's some tiny amount. And I'm like, you clearly have never been to a grocery store and bought your own food for a family of four or five or even just two of you. Yeah. So, but
Absolutely not. Yes,
my
yes.
before we wrap up, my question is this author Michael Lerner, is he white?
That's a good question. I believe so. I believe so.
Because
Because
I do think this piece around, this mindset, you have her note here saying this mindset convinces individuals that they have no agency to change their circumstances even when they do.
hmm hmm
And I think that there is a shade of victim blaming in that. And granted, I
hmm
haven't read the book and I'm just looking at your notes, right? In that,
yeah.
so for a family that, you know, is, descended from enslaved people, haven't been able to build generational wealth, are in environments that are oppressive and not supportive. Housing is barely
hmm
affordable. Public education isn't very good. They're already working two jobs, right? I feel like that's not I feel like it's not a mindset, right? Like you just
hmm
have to have a better attitude and you can beat back all these systemic and structural and historical systems or beliefs that are working against you.
Well, and even with that, so Michael Lerner, I'm forgive me, I was having a complete lapse in my brain of Michael Lerner. Michael Lerner actually passed away just a few years ago, but he's a
Oh,
rabbi, or he was a rabbi.
okay.
And he's written a number of different books and has been a longtime political activist, but has been, y'all know how much I love dialogue, but he specifically focuses on interfaith dialogue and focused on social
Okay.
justice connections between that. Now, here's the thing though. When you have a PhD in philosophy and you're focusing on philosophy, clinical, social psychology, well, of course, yes, you're thinking about mindset shift, but from what angle and
Right.
what layer of privilege? So you're
Yeah.
still on it. You're still on it. Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I like it. I think it's interesting, and I do think the interplay between internalized depression and then learned helplessness, and also I might throw in there like this kind of notion of
hmm
victimhood, that gets thrown around a lot, that people just, are quote unquote playing the victim, and how all those concepts are
hmm
are linked or not. But I think where it most resonates with me is right now and how people feel unable to do anything to
Yeah.
change this trajectory. And so
hmm
their feelings of powerlessness have increased. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to keep grappling with the word because now I'm curious. I'm like, okay, should I go ahead and get the book now because I want to
Mm,
really see what what mindset shift are we saying here? Because he goes on later on in the book and mentions that the solution, if there is one, to this mindset is encouraging people to trust their inner knowing,
yeah. Yeah. Okay.
building solidarity and collective agency. So, not not leaving yourself to your own devices here, but what does this look like in community? And then replacing shame and isolation with empathy and connection. So, yeah, I could see that
Mm,
moving the needle a bit, but I just want to continue to process it,
mm,
considering how many problems need these type of solutions.
yeah,
But of course, we can't be the solution all by our lonesome here. So, yeah.
right, right.
So, anyway, all right, take us into phase one.
Okay, this is a spillover because I had hoped to talk about this last week in my little grab bag that ended up being mostly about the shutdown and snap. So I want to talk about ICE. Um, let's talk about
How long
ICE.
do they have, Lisa? How long do they have?
This is just a high level discussion of our feelings about ICE for the next 15 minutes. But so, for those who aren't familiar, ICE hasn't actually existed forever and a day, right? It actually was developed after, like, all of the immigration systems got revamped after 9/11. And that was when immigration and customs enforcement came into being. So 2003. So it's what, 22 years old? Um, it's done a lot of damage. And what's really interesting to me about the evolution of this organization is that historically, um, people on the left ideologically have never been a big fan, right? Because it's a law enforcement agency. But generally speaking, people, more conservative people, more quote unquote law and order people have um, been generally supportive of its existence. But what I am hearing now, because I'm trying to listen to a lot of conservative voices, mostly conservative voices who are not happy with what's happening in the United States, but still conservative voices that I have a lot of disagreements with, they're at the point where they're like, abolish ICE. So it's this really bizarre like shift that they're actually watching the dehumanization and the violence and the ways in which this kind of secret in the sense that people are covering their faces, has led them to recognize the damage, and I'm like, great that you're there, excellent, right? Took you a little while, but this, if this is what got you there, that you're there, fantastic. So, um, there have been so many videos, Shauna, that have been circulating on social media and to some degree on the news about the ways in which ICE has been essentially kidnapping people from the streets. They're covering their faces because they are getting harassed and doxxed, right? And so they don't want their identities to be known, which I find to be quite hypocritical. But you work for the federal government, and you are a law enforcement officer, and it is my right to know who you are and which agency you are from, right? And recently, a couple of weeks ago, there was a woman in Durango in Colorado. This has happened everywhere, but this is just recent for me in my state, that was filming an ICE officer, and he literally, I think he grabbed her by the neck and then just like threw her down an embankment. Um, and so she was injured from it. Durango is not a big town in Colorado. It's in the southwestern area. A lot of farming out there. Also a lot of wealth because there's some ski areas, but so a lot of service workers as well. And you take that episode that happened in Durango and you just multiply it, right? Happening across the United States. I'm sure you have stories about what's been happening in Maryland. We also have the big issue with Chicago where they rappelled onto the roof, and kind of came down and through the windows and smashed open the doors and took everyone out, children included. um, and there are legal residents, there are citizens being swept up and being incarcerated and held for hours to days, for them to quote unquote verify their citizenship. And we already talked about the racial profiling that has now been allowed by the Supreme Court. But one of the things I just wanted to raise, and then I'll stop and get your perspective, Shauna, is at the end of October, there was a reorg in ICE in terms of ICE leadership. And Tom Homan, who is the quote unquote border czar, I guess has been too focused on uh, arresting and deporting criminals. And Kristi Noem and some other people are sidelining him, it sounds like, and they have reorged to put more people in leadership who are more aligned with their thinking, which is arrest and deport everyone, right? So this in and of itself is shocking because Tom Homan is not a liberal squish, right? He is a hard line anti-immigration person. And his focus on criminals or people who have been accused and convicted of crimes is not hard enough. So I'm not sure how that reorg is all going to play out and what this is going to mean for the rest of the year and into the new year. But there's this increasing role of Customs and Border Patrol also, and that's a lot of the violence is being perpetrated by them. So anyway, that's my little 5 minute entree, and I'm
Oh,
wondering what you are experiencing and your thoughts about it all.
yeah. Well, remember, even when we go back to when, I'm not going to say when this first began, but when things got extremely heavy with ICE, remember Kilmar Abrego Garcia was from
Right.
here in this area. I mean, I
Yes,
believe
yes.
his address was, or at least he was in Beltsville, Maryland at the time. That is a stone's throw from where I currently live, and it's in my county. So, which was a national, a national story, obviously. And being threatened to be sent to Uganda, which makes no sense whatsoever, or made no sense at the time. And so, no, this has been going on here too. So, yeah, Maryland and Colorado, we have our issues going on here. But, again, here we go with when are we going to get to the point where we are actually honoring what we said we would, which is due process?
Yeah.
This is exhausting. And so it's, to me, and especially looking through this as a Black person looking through the lens of a long-standing legacy of kidnapping.
Yeah. Yeah.
I equate this to kidnapping.
Oh, for sure.
I equate this to kidnapping. And so with that, I think, uh, going back to our point around, the fear that's stoked around this. I'm also still thinking too, there were some stories that were floating around, and I don't know how many were true or were not true, but even as far as the recruitment of ICE officers in regard to their benefits and quote
Yeah.
unquote forgiving, if they have student loans, forgiving them, but hey, nobody else should have their
Hmm.
student loans forgiven. Like all these different things that obviously create inconsistencies. Again, drilling down to the notion that we have someone in office who thinks he can do whatever he wants to do, and rules are not even suggestions. They're not.
Yeah.
Laws are not even suggestions. That's what people have done, but they do not apply to me. And that's where things, continue to be problematic for me. And so, with that, even with the reorg, it's like, come on. I mean, it very much reminds me of our current and hopefully over federal shutdown. It's like, okay, interesting. So let me get this straight. You're in charge
Hmm.
and you're not even smart enough to reorg in a way that benefits you because you're picking the wrong people, but you have the right to pick who you want. And so we'll see where the dissension lies, and let's set them up for failure. So then they start getting threats and other issues happening to them as well. Like sometimes I really do feel like it's the folks that he's selecting. Either he really is that deranged to not understand that they don't align, or this is multiple player, multiple game chess where you're choosing someone to set them up to then be more visible and a target anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the inside of that man's brain is a jello. I don't know. Um, But
Jello would be offended.
yeah, perhaps, yeah. Um, I just, I
Oh,
mean, I feel like this is, this kind of dystopian situation where we have
yeah,
masked agents. And the thing about the benefits that you were sharing, it's like $50,000 you get over 5 years if you sign up. And I read a piece in The Atlantic that said all of these, so ICE agents are law enforcement, right? So
yeah.
they are designed to, or the organization is designed to conduct immigration related law enforcement inside the country.
Mm-hmm.
So there are activity standards, right? You have to be able to run a certain speed and you have to be able to be fit. And because their budget has ballooned since the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, right? So they are now like the most well-funded law enforcement agency in the United States. So more
That's
than the
right.
FBI, more than others, right?
Mm,
So they're trying to do this big recruiting, but they're recruits because they're just getting all these people who, many of whom hate immigrants, but they're
mhm.
not, they don't have the athletic ability. So they are having to adapt those standards, or there are people that are coming in and then they're just not getting through the various stages of the
That's right.
process
Mm-hmm.
because many of them can't run a mile. I think it's like you have to run a mile. I'm not remembering exactly. It might be like a 10:30 mile, an 11-minute mile, something like that. Like you have to be able to do that and they can't do it.
They can't do it. Yeah, they can't.
So, and they've also reduced the training time. So I forget what it went
Oh,
to, but I am absolutely making these numbers up. You will have to check this online. But let's say the training to become an ICE agent was 4 months. Now it is like 2.5 months or something. They've
mm,
condensed the training so they are more rapidly certifying, qualifying, whatever that process is, these ICE agents who may or may not have deficiencies in certain areas. And so then these people are going out onto the streets, and they're the ones, in addition to Customs and Border Patrol, that are then enacting violence on US residents, US citizens, undocumented people, and their faces are covered. So you just have a expansive law enforcement agency that is not being held accountable and does not have officers that are meeting, in some cases, kind of this basic standards of law enforcement training and behavior. Because to
mm,
your point, those issues
mm-hmm.
around due process are just not happening. I mean, this one guy, Greg Bavino, I think his name is, he was in the
Yeah.
news at the beginning of the month because a Chicago judge said he had to come in every day and file reports about how he was ensuring that his officers were following a court order that they can't use violence or something. I forget the specifics of it. But
Wow.
then, so, and this is a guy there. The funniest thing to me, this, I know it's not funny, but it's funny because these people are rolling around in fatigues, in camouflage, in a city. Why? Right? And they have
Why?
their full helmets on. Like they're,
Makes
and
no sense.
right, and someone made the comment that it was like they're going into Fallujah or something, right? You're in
Right.
Chicago, you are in a city. Like the camouflage colors do not camouflage you. That's the purpose of those outfits. And you're in a city. You don't need this massive headgear and all of this. Like, what are you doing, right?
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing, Shauna, that I
Mm-mm.
also want to get your thoughts on is the way in which ICE and CBP, so really Christy Nome here, are embedding film crews into these raids and into these
Mm-mm.
arrests so they can
Mm-mm.
then package little propagandist social media videos. What do you think about that?
We know exactly, but you took the word right out of my mouth. I was about to say propagandizing once
Mm,
again in a way that shapes the freaking narrative. They're doing
right,
it
right.
for a reason. I mean, are you trying to be Facebook famous out here? What are you doing? I mean, it's you can and we know what happens. We know what happens. We know what happens. And in fact, we know how dangerous this man has been in the past with lots of stuff, whether it was AI generated photos or videos and so forth. all he's trying to do is stack the deck to create a spectacle that can then
Hmm.
be used in a way that he thinks is going to recruit folks, or at least try to paint this picture that he's doing such a great job at protecting the American people.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Protecting
that
American
is
people from that
so
mother.
staged,
Yeah.
staged.
Yeah. I just, I
Oh, so
think
staged.
to your issue, to go back to the word of the week, to wrap this up, I think you do have legal rights. You can film these encounters
Hmm.
on your phone. That is your free speech right to do so. Obviously, you make that choice based on your own feelings of safety, right? But you can
Hmm.
absolutely do that. Other recommendations are to take photographs of the license plates of the officers, photographs of the officers. If there is a person that is being detained, get their name, get family members' information, perhaps that you can then contact those family members because we know they're being taken off and often out of state to places and they have no opportunity to call family members. So that's something that you can do.
Yeah.
In ways of if you're having a surplus of powerlessness, like these are some
Yeah.
things that you can do if you are in communities that are being targeted with
Hmm.
these immigration um, quote unquote crackdowns, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, but that staging piece of things, I think that's interesting, but yet, every time I think we go low, we just
We go lower.
go a little bit lower, just a little bit lower. And
Yeah, I don't think we've hit bottom yet, Shauna. I think we're still on the way down.
agreed, agreed,
Yeah.
agreed, agreed. All right, let's go into phase two. All right, Lisa. So, as part of my escapism,
Hmm.
I have been getting into, of course, all of the very cool Instagrammable personalities that have been
Okay.
trying to give us some skill sets, right? Some skill sets. Now, Lisa, I don't know about your education when you were in the UK, but I know for me, K through 12 here, we had, and this is going to be a throwback for some listeners. We had home economics, home ec.
Yeah, but yeah.
We're learning how to cook and learning how to clean and learning how to sew a pillow and learning how to do all of these very functional things, right? Well, fortunately, living in a rural area, these are things that we kind of had to do anyway, but they just codified it, within public education. And now my sons, they now are going through a class that is the exact same thing, Lisa, but they've now called it Exploring Facts, FACS, Exploring Family and Consumer Sciences is what it's.
Mm.
um, they're doing the same thing. They're still making the little mini pizzas on the English muffin, all those things that we used to do as kids. They're doing the same thing. And so, anyway, what made my escapism very interesting was that many of those skills that we learned in home ec, in exploring facts, and whatever your school happened to call it, these Instagrammable personalities are bringing back some of those functional DIY, do it yourself skill sets to either remind people of what we used to do and get back to that,
Hmm.
or equip people who've never had to do it before to now do it, right? And so, with that, I thought it was really interesting. A few things. Let me rattle off some of the personalities that I've started watching. This is only scratching the surface, but I wanted to give kind of a broad swath of folks that I've been very interested in, due to our current context, right?
Hmm.
So Kiki Ruff is she's an online chef. But what I think is really interesting is that she started pulling recipes actually from wartime recipes that
Oh.
are inexpensive. Most of us have most of what we need around the house in order
Hmm.
to actually make these meals. And she gives examples of those wartime meals that were filling and went a longer way, if you will. You could stretch it when you have a larger family type of thing. Perfecto Patrick Brown, also a very interesting and community minded personality, also on Instagram. Patrick Brown, I caught him baking from scratch, just baking loaf bread from scratch and creating starters so that he could give them away to people in his community that might need to do so, especially for larger families and especially as grocery prices continue to rise. So he's another one. Jenny Mack, I've been following her. I actually caught the very first video I caught of her was using corn silks to turn into a tincture for lots of different things, whether it's for maybe you have IBS, maybe your gut health is kind of weird, and using some of those tinctures in order to create our own at-home DIY pharmacy because there may be certain medications and prescriptions that folks that need them may not be able to get access to or may not be able to get access to them as often as needed. Another one, Danny Clark has turned an entire garden into a community garden. And so, what I found interesting about some of his videos was, for example, he would go to the grocery store and let's say he'd buy a green pepper, red pepper, what have you. And he'd hold it in his hands and he always said, "This is the last time I'm going to have to buy peppers." And he'd take the seeds out and show you how to propagate and so forth. All this to say, I've been deeply thinking about how we, especially during this time period, especially when times are tight, people do not have access to the same revenue they've had in the past, all the things, how folks are now and probably should be abandoning the convenience that we could afford to now move to this DIY survival perspective where, for example, yes, you may have known all along how to bake your own bread, but the convenience of life kind of said, I can afford to buy that X price bread because I don't have time to bake it, to proof it, to do what I need to do. So I'm
Hmm.
just going to buy it. And so, given this squeeze of the context that we're in now, I'm so appreciating how folks are reminding us of skill sets or handing us skill sets, right? Like, even for me in the holidays, I'm like ready to go home because I know that there are some recipes that I used to make all the time that I haven't made them for a very long time. So if I made them by memory, they might not turn out that great. Ready to go home to look back through our family recipes to remind myself of some of those dishes and items that I used to make regularly to either stretch a dollar or to stretch your resources that we just haven't had to do because the context was more comfortable. Now that context is less comfortable, folks are having to figure it out. And I'm appreciating how people are using social media to help folks figure things out. I mean, even if let's say you can't afford to buy a new car, but you need to keep patching up the one you have. Mechanics are online telling you how to do some basic things so that you can stretch a dollar and keep rolling. And so, all that to say, Lisa, I'm just appreciative that somebody's sourcing this information for folks. Um, and I'm wondering possibly how this lands for you and maybe even some things that you've picked up on that you've done because I remember the discovery of the tomato garden out back and how that was just a wonderful moment. Maybe how this lands on you and your current lifestyle as you're thinking through the next few months and hopefully not years, but who knows?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, what this is making me think of is what happened at the beginning of the pandemic, right? When
Oh, yeah.
people were being forced to stay home or they had lost their job in 2020, there was an explosion online of like, let's make bread together, or let's do this, or let's learn a new skill, right? And for folks, it's slightly different, right? Because there were a significant number of people who lost their job, but they weren't necessarily interested in, well, I'm just going to make a loaf of bread then, right? Like, it was, so there's a little different, there's a different vibe about it. What I'm hearing you're saying is this kind of what you're following now is more closely associated with the economic downturn. And certainly that was present in COVID, but there was just a different vibe about it. And I think it's really great. I mean, I saw a lot of social media related, we've talked about the Snap stuff a lot, but there were a lot of socials where folks were encouraging their neighbors to buy groceries or leave groceries outside, especially around Halloween. Um, and so there is this larger acknowledgement, right, that we're in a difficult financial time. And particularly if you worked for the federal government and now you don't, and then all of those agencies that have lost funding and kind of the trickle down effect to their clients. Um, I just feel like this is a larger commentary on what am I trying to say? Like government failure that
Yeah.
we as a as our individual communities or larger
Mhm.
communities are essentially crowdsourcing knowledge and skills because of a broad-based acknowledgement that people are out of work, the job market sucks, um,
Mm.
uh, the
Mhm.
the economy isn't doing so great. So we're now doing all of this stuff to mitigate it, but we shouldn't
Mhm.
have to, right? Like
Yes.
you sh
Yes.
you should be able to bake a loaf of bread and know how to do that because it brings you joy to do that and you like to bake, right? You shouldn't have to do that because you can't afford to buy a loaf of bread and it's cheaper, right? Like,
The reason why.
yeah, like, and I realize that's a bit Pollyanna to assume that
Mm.
time has ever existed, right? Because there's always hunger and there's always poverty in this country, and too many people are always trying to make ends meet and have vegetable gardens or make their own bread or watch YouTube videos about how to fix your furnace because they can't afford to bring someone in, right? Like that. It's not like that is new, but it just feels more pronounced right now about how um, our government is failing us to the point where
Mhm.
you've noticed this proliferation of this kind of social media activist, I
Mhm,
suppose, right?
mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the urgency of it. It's,
Mm,
the urgency of, because to your point, I'm even thinking, since the pandemic, you're right, it's a different tone with it. So during the pandemic, it may have been, yeah, we're feeling a little bit of a downturn, but I'm still baking this loaf of bread because I find joy in it and I have time because now I don't have 3 hours worth of commute every day because I'm
right.
working from home. So that's one tone compared to, let's say, another tone of I have no choice. If
Yeah,
I don't make the bread myself, then we won't have it. Versus another tone of I'm a single parent that's working two and a half jobs and I got to figure out a time to bake this bread, even though I barely have time to even look my kids
right,
in the face, but I still have
right.
to find a way because I don't have the time, I don't have the money, and I don't have the resources. So find a way.
Yeah, I mean that's where the person perfecto Pat that made me laugh. That he's providing the starters because you're right.
Yeah,
Like I can't afford to buy bread doesn't equal I have time to make it, right? Because your example is perfect,
exactly.
right? Like, so what then? So it's not even just here's a skill to help you save some money. It's like I'm just gonna I've done this for you because I know you can't afford it and you don't have the time to do it. So let me give
Mhm.
skills to people in your life or in your community who do have a bit more time who can do that for you. I mean, I don't know, that is going to feel different for different people depending on their circumstances, but it even seems like it's acknowledging that
Mhm.
like community gardening, right? Like that's the whole purpose of community garden. It's not one person's garden. It's like everyone, and then everyone can kind of like,
Mhm.
take the bounty, so to speak,
Yes, yes, literally.
without
Yeah.
feeling like it's just on my shoulders that I have to find the time to look after this garden. It's actually dispersed, right? Like the time and the value of that is dispersed. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly.
yeah, I mean, I know you brought this up as your escapism, but now I just feel a bit sad about it.
Well, but so here's the thing. So a family member of mine, speaking to that though, I think this is telling of our Gen X-ness, Lisa. Let me
Okay,
tell you why.
okay.
And the reason why I think this is telling of our Gen X-ness is that part of me was like, oh man, I mean, generations before me worked really hard so that I could make the bread out of joy rather than making the bread out of necessity. But at the same time, when I talk to someone in the family that's of an older generation of mine, of boomer generation, yes, they acknowledge how hard times are and will be for people, but also appreciated how baking that bread or making that starter now creates community that hasn't
Mm,
always been tightly knit. And so, both out of necessity, the food is the center, but really the relationships become the glue, the yeast,
yeah, okay.
all of that. It becomes that. And so, even trying to pull that, that positivity out of things, or at least one value we want, because think about it. I remember, for many years people talked about, oh, I lived in this house, but I lived there for years and never knew my next door neighbors by name, because there wasn't a need to. Well, what happens when now there is a need and now you
Right.
can get to know? And, the neighbors across the street from me, they have like a 6-month old right now. Hello, I hope somebody's taking them some diapers and stuff over there because times are tighter. Um,
Hmm.
and so, given that, what do we glean from it? Even even if my magic wand worked and I can make all of this blow over right now, there are folks that would still say, because of some of our conversations we've had about loneliness and isolation and so forth, is that they would still want some of the resulting connecting relationships because of that. And so,
Hmm.
it's almost like I don't think the ends justifies the means, but the means are getting us to an end. And that end may be more community, more connection, more um yeah, more humanity of people. Like, that's one of the things I'm also noticing too. Think about everything that we've even talked about in this episode where people have been processing it as a sound bite of news that they're getting. When think about when that sound bite turns into your actual neighbor. Like,
Yeah.
Mr. Kilmar is an actual neighbor. I can drive you past the house right now of his family. It's not a soundbite anymore because it's very real. Or
Yeah.
your neighbors down the street where both of them have government jobs and they went from having, mid six-figure income to now zero.
Yeah.
That's a very real concept. And sometimes we need that community to make it real rather than a soundbite or a villain that we have no real connection to.
Yeah, and I think the more this goes on, the more that will happen, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that is a silver lining, what you're describing. And then I'm also thinking about all of the folks that have been protesting ICE and have been making those videos and putting the stuff out on social media,
Yes.
and the news outlets that have been covering it appropriately, um, versus watering it down, right? That is also a silver lining, right? Like people are stepping up. And so these social media people that are dispersing the skills and suggesting, you could do this for your community. I mean, it's another
Hmm.
way of people stepping up when these times are difficult. When you started going on about the Gen X, I thought what you were going to say was, well, we're the generation that basically was left to our own devices. So we just learned how to do all this stuff because we didn't have parents around. That's where I thought you were going with it. Because
That's the
that's,
truth
that's,
too, though. You're not
that is the
lying.
truth with Gen
That's the
X. Yeah.
truth. That is the
Yeah.
truth. I mean, yeah, there were lots of things we learned on our, but again, we even learned them realizing that at some point it's almost like your back pocket skills. Like, yeah, I got that in my
Mm.
back pocket, but I doubt very seriously I'll ever have to use it. Or like, gosh, this was Kendrick never ceases to amaze me on stuff, and both of my boys can sew better than I can. Let me just put it that way. But what I was mentioning about the exploring facts class, so he
Hmm.
had a hole in one of his socks for football, and they're still doing the pink breast cancer socks and all that other stuff. And so anyway, he had a hole in one of them, and I said, "Oh, okay, well leave that on my dresser, and I'll take care of it while you're at school." He's like, "No, Mom, just give me needle and thread, and I'll take care of it," because he had just learned how to do it like 2 weeks ago in this class, right? And again, thinking to myself, it's it's more top of mind to him because he just learned this skill.
Yeah, yeah.
I learned this skill decades ago and have not had to use it for decades. I could get away with it. It wouldn't be the prettiest sock, but I could do it. You wouldn't have a
Hmm.
hole at the end of the day. And I think that's where the being more tightly coupled with these skills that we put in our back pockets, they're now going to become front pocket.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, they just are. Things that even forgot sometimes we knew how to do, we're now going to learn how to do them or remember how to do them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sewing is an underrated skill, right? That is a great skill to have. And that your boys have it is excellent because when I was growing up, I mean, I went to an all girls high school, but pretty sure
Okay.
my brother didn't do home economics.
Yeah, yeah. All of them do home economics. So from what I know thus far, since they started school, they've done sewing. They have been both the head chef, the assistant chef, and the dishwasher. So there's no excuses about not knowing how to hand wash
Yep.
dishes. They know how to safely turn on and off a stovetop and a oven and how to read it appropriately. They know how to use specific tool, a Phillips head screwdriver and certain things like that. And so with all that, and the reason why I figured out they knew how to do that, Trey needs it all the time because he's taking those flat things off the back of trains to put batteries in them.
Okay.
And Kendrick, because of his lacrosse head, has to use a Phillips screwdriver to either take it off or tighten it up. So all these different things, I'm like, who taught y'all all this stuff? Because clearly I'm the inept mom that never taught you this stuff because it's like, when do you need to use it? Now we're finding that the frequency of use, it's necessitating this stuff. And so we're getting to a place
Mm.
where life is no longer about convenience. It is about how do we survive? And it's going to require us to dust off some old skills or acquire some new ones.
Well, yeah, for some, right? And this just popped into my head as you were talking.
Yeah.
So the Halloween party that the Trump administration held was the theme was the Great Gatsby. So the Great Gatsby was, the time period for that was the Gilded Age, right? When there's just a lot of wealth and just think like decadence, right? That's probably the best way to describe it. So this Halloween party is happening. You've got all of these Republican senators specifically making incorrect assertions about SNAP beneficiaries. Obviously very much detached from the reality of grocery shopping and how one might use the EBT card. And then and so I just feel like you have this juxtaposition of this Gilded Age, Great Gatsby Halloween party with all these very rich, very powerful, very connected people. And then you have, at the time, 42 million people that weren't receiving SNAP. You have these social media influences that you're talking about. You have teaching people to use skills because of the knowledge that there people don't have jobs, they don't have an income, they don't have the time. And so this is really quite stark juxtaposition, and it made me think of the Hunger Games. And I said to a friend, I was like, I feel like we're in the Hunger Games, and I feel like our
Yes.
president is President Snow. You have all of this wealth
Oh, yeah.
and um uh, what's the word I'm looking for?
Mm-hmm.
Like grandiosity. And then you
Mm-hmm.
have the people out in the districts who are having to crowdsource, how do I fix my car? How do I
Mm-hmm.
grow a tomato because I don't really have money to go to the grocery store, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So crowdsourcing, and I'm very appreciative of the relationships, but I wish they didn't have to come at such a cost.
right, right.
Wish they did not. So, all right. Well, look, go learn something. Okay, go learn something or remind yourself of how to do something. I was figuring
Yep,
out how to clean my washer and dryer thing out to vacuum out something that I saw in a YouTube video. Learn something. Okay, learn something. Uh,
yep.
but that is a wrap for this week's episode, but I'm just challenging us before next week's episode. Learn how to do something new or remember how to do something new. But certainly after this episode, you can reach us on all of your social media and podcast apps at Unfazed Unedited with brackets around that first un. Email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com or visit our website, unfazedpodcast.com. We will certainly provide you access to the old and the new shows. And Lisa, I'm very focused on making sure that I provide folks with the handles of many of the folks that we mentioned during the
Hmm.
podcast so that they can follow folks if they have a need for their skill set, right?
Yep.
So if you like this week's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this with friends, coworkers, or others in this phase of your life. So until next week.
All right. See you next week.